Hi, so my name is Felicia. I go by Felispeaks, and I'm a poet, performer, playwright.
Hi, how are you? Felicia, great welcome. For people that don't know, I've been trying to get this together for the last week in between both our schedules, mainly
Yeah,
mine. It's been very difficult. I'll have to start actually from where I last saw you, which was on Monday night. Yeah, on Monday night in Emma in that amazing production, The Abbey, The Great Hunger. And just the particularly the setting and the words and the performances, that must be something special, or must be something special to be involved in, Felicia, is it?
yeah, it really is special. I'm really excited about it all the time. Every time I go in, I'm like, oh my God, I can't believe we get to do this. It's really interesting. And it's my first time having something that uniquely set up outside. Um, yeah, I'm really excited about it.
Yeah, I mean, it looks stunning. I mean, your piece in particular, the way kind of it's lit and the tree is just, yeah. I know there's no tickets left, but I would advise everyone to try and go and see it. Come here, take me back. Was writing always something, or performance, was that always something in your life? Was that kind of something from an early age that you were drawn to?
Yeah, I suppose I wouldn't have known that it was necessarily me being drawn to performance. I just liked art related things. I liked growing up singing in the choir, in the church, at school. And, you get into plays that the school sets up or somebody writes. It's really fun. And I was in a number of plays in primary school. I think one of them was called the 10 o'clock clock, and there was people dressed up as clocks, and it was basically a bunch of teenage girls getting lost in like a haunted house, and I was one of the teenage girls that was lost in the haunted house with all the cheeky remarks. It was really interesting. And there was another time there was a Halloween related one. So I grew up around a lot of art stuff that was normal to primary schools, or normal to, yeah, the average primary school, but I just latched onto it a bit more, I think.
And was it in your family at all? Were your kind of family artistic or creative? Was it kind of at home?
No, not at all. My mom and dad, neither of them are particularly into the arts at all.
Yeah. And come here, when because you grew up in Longford, wasn't it? Was that kind of where?
Yeah, I grew up in Longford Town.
And I funny, my used to be an actor many years ago, and we kind of all the touring shows would play in Longford. I remember kind of many a night in Slashers GAA club
Yeah.
back in the day. But come here, what was going? I mean, when you then kind of went into secondary school and kind of when you started talking about thinking about what you might do, with your life and career, was it kind of an avenue that was there for you, or is something, was that kind of easy to kind of go towards?
Um, it definitely, acting or performing or writing definitely wasn't something that I specifically wanted to do in secondary school. I think in secondary school I thought, okay, I'll go into something media related, maybe I'll be on the radio, maybe I'll be a journalist, something of that sort. So I thought about it more in a quite corporate setting. I didn't think about um, doing something with my life that was completely creative full time.
Yeah. And
So I thought,
was there a moment that changed for you? Was kind of like, was there was that kind of a slow change, or was there a time that you kind of feel, oh, that's when I kind of started taking it more seriously?
I think it was definitely a slow change. It was gradual. It was something that I had to see a lot more opportunity and realistic survival in. Um, so it was more or less after college. I did it as like a side job. I suppose a few months, a few years in, I started seeing more of the value of it,
Yeah.
and went in full time, I
Yeah.
suppose.
And what did you study in college? What did you do in college?
For my undergrad, I studied English and sociology.
Okay. And I suppose what's interesting to me, because an awful lot of artists that I kind of speak to, particularly those who are kind of in writing or in spoken word, in the last number of years, there's been an explosion in that. There's also been an explosion in kind of the artist stroke activist space. And I'm kind of in like with a kind of a studying or degree or a kind of academic process like English and sociology. Was that kind of, was the campaigning activism space always active for you, Felicia, from that time?
Um, I don't think so. I don't think I thought about it specifically as activism until maybe recently.
Okay.
I think I just thought about it as caring about people, being empathetic, or having an emotional relationship with justice, and people deserving better.
Yeah.
So I suppose these labels became official for me on maybe recently when, one, I had access to use them properly, and two, it, I suppose it was clear what it was. But
Yeah.
just, I suppose, growing up and being in college, it wasn't something that I thought of as something to do or something to call something.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think I was just really passionate about people and justice.
No, it's interesting because I kind of did see sometimes it can be a big kind of problem with kind of with labels of kind of because people are very quick to kind of label and box people into particular art forms in a particular context. And I suppose your work brilliantly over the last 3 years has kind of cut through, from doing the very hunger to doing tatty to doing a lot of kind of workshops to doing very visceral campaigning work to doing your own kind of poetry and hip hop. And it's very exciting. It seems to be a very exciting space that you're in at the moment.
It definitely does feel exciting. I feel like I'm doing a lot of learning what I'm into, discovering what my likes and dislikes are. And I suppose it's the age to do that. It's the time to do that. Quite fresh and early in my career, rather than like pigeonhole myself and then be like, oh, I wish I did more of this.
Yeah,
Um, and I suppose there is still a lot more that I'd like to do, but I'm only one person, so it's in order to get to a level of perfection or a level of to have a quality in these aspects. I suppose I have to do them for a while and keep exploring.
and come here, what's your writing process like, Felicia? I mean, like, what was like when you started to kind of, really explore writing? Um, like I was chatting to a writer yesterday, and she was saying like the big difference between writing for yourself and then having to pass that on to somebody else to kind of read, or in fact for you to get up in front of an audience and kind of perform it. Were you writing for yourself before you kind of started thinking about getting into the performative space?
Absolutely. I was writing for myself a long time before I started writing to perform or before I started writing for other people. I suppose I used to keep a book called My Book of Thoughts, and I had it from maybe about 15 or 16. So I used to write a lot when I was younger. Started performing my first open mic slams in college at 18, 19. So I suppose now I don't know if my writing process is much different from when I was younger. Um, but whenever it's specifically a commission or a specific project, I think I write a little differently. I just kind of it's more or less no matter what, I have to put something down on the page and it has to be good. So I've kind of gotten myself into training myself out of writing to feel or writing because I feel, and being able to garner emotions and thoughts and write them regardless of if I'm feeling them or not.
Yeah, yeah, and it's interesting because if is that book of feelings and thoughts still active? Is that still a thing for you? Is that
Yeah, it's still a thing. It's like midway between a journal and a poetry book.
yes, you'll publish it at some time. It'll be on the DVD outtakes.
To myself, maybe when like all these famous people after they die, somebody else releases their journal and their stuff, and they're like, "Oh, look at this treasure."
Yeah, no, but you have to release it first. No letting someone else getting the money. Get it out there early.
But then I have to see everybody's reaction to it. Oh, jeez.
Talk to me about then the poetry collectives and the growth of say you within that kind of hip hop. I mean, what would you find yourself as you kind of got into the area of spoken word poetry that that and in a kind of time as well when it was kind of really booming in Ireland and kind of blending between playwriting or theatre, hip hop, spoken word, and there was a kind of all the walls were coming down there. there obviously was a collective of you that kind of get gathered. Can you just talk to me about how yourself and Samuel and the Go-Go, sorry, got together? How did that kind of happen?
So with the first collective, that was Word Up Collective, and they were the ones that were mostly based in the hip hop scene. So they were managing and assisting artists that were rappers and musicians, and kind of giving them a great platform to head start. And then I suppose I was the first poet to kind of come along as part of the collective, and it was brilliant because they just kind of put me on the same shows and platforms as the rappers and the musicians in the scene that had nothing to do with me, and then I just kind of had to rock up, soak up the hip hop vibe, and then perform like a poem about mental health or a poem about love or just something really random like that. And I think I thoroughly enjoyed that because one, it gave me a safe space, kind of like near artists that I've just started to get to know, people that I'm comfortable with, and their friends coming to watch them. So it gave me a safe space for growth, and to be in many different kinds of scenes as possible. That's the interesting thing about music spaces. When you drop a poet in there, you're like, I'm not supposed to be here, but it's great because you find a way to blend in with your performance and the strength of your voice. Because the musicians have their mic, they have a beat, they have flow, they have hype boys, and you have a poem, and you have to make that just as hard as what just came up before you. So that was the first collective that really like strengthened my confidence, gave me a lot of space to grow. And then in recent years, myself and the Gogo started We Are Griot. I think just a couple of months after we wrote our first play, Boy Child, and that was amazing. It was an incredible experience. And then we just started recruiting people. So we started We Are Griot so that we'd create plays as well as host a hip hop and poetry kind of show called Talkatives. So Talkatives meant that we put rappers and poets head to head because we just believe that both, flow one from the other, and both are quite similar to the other. So we wanted to put rappers and poets in the same space and give them room to grow, kind of like what happened for me. Um, Sorry about my dog. He's just doing the most this morning. Um, but that's basically how it happened. And currently, We Are Griot is writing a few plays and working on more talkatives and hoping that they let us out of here.
But talk to me about Boy Child, because again, that was a moment there, of that in the Fringe, and the attention, and it was brilliant, and the attention that it got, and also nominated for awards, and but also I think it was a moment for yourself, because again, the Fringe is a fantastic space that kind of has all those barriers down. So the art forms are kind of there in their own regard, but also in that kind of hybrid space. So that must have been a really exciting time to be putting that together and putting it on.
It was very exciting. I still can't believe we pulled it off because one, it was the first play that I'd ever written. And I was like, I cannot believe this. First play I'd ever written. It was the first one that it was also like a mixture of everything. It was a mixture of heritage, our culture. It was a mixture of pieces of our lives and stories that we really wanted to tell, and then putting poetry in front of it. And honestly, I think one of the most amazing things that happened for Boy Child was having Deirdre Malloy directed. And I'm so glad she took a shot on us and she was like, yeah, I like you guys enough to do this
Yeah.
because she's a legend. And then the fact that it sold out, and I still can't believe it. I know that a lot of Fringe shows sell out because Fringe is amazing, but like I was like, my show, what? It sold out, and then the theater that we did it in, called the New Theater, called us back the following March to do it again, and I was like, wow, this is amazing. So that was definitely a journey. It was a moment. It felt like it was one of the first real times I was like, this is really doable. Like I can actually do this.
Yeah.
And and that the things that come out of my head as well as the Gogo's head, is of value, and that it has a marketplace. And
Yeah.
I'm like, all of these things kind of dawned on me, and I thought to myself, I can really try theater a little bit more, and I could dive deeper into performance beyond poetry.
Yeah.
Um, so it's been an exciting climb since then, I
And
suppose.
it's interesting as well, because well, I suppose from like knowing Deirdre well and kind of seeing the show and also looking at your kind of career path since then, the type of work that you do, it's also that it seemed a demographic kind of change then as well. Do you know what I mean? That was because you were placed not within necessarily, a rap or a poetry context. It
Mm.
was in a theatre context, which even broadened out, which broadened out an audience for your work that you brought on that has kind of stayed with you, that kind of and that must be very. I say that must be fascinating because I mean you mentioned like obviously around we've a huge kind of involvement in say the local rap and hip hop scene here and for years like the poetry of their writing sometimes you can't hear it because of the way it's performed but like when you strip it all back it's poetry and it's extraordinary writing but
Yeah.
also the theatricality of the performance of it is kind of really key as well. So when you have someone like yourself kind of cutting through that space, um, it's led to you doing amazing things. I mean, like I was looking at in preparation for kind of chatting to you, some of the places you've performed, you're kind of going, wow. I mean, that's in the space of though if you even take those 3 years since 2.5, 3 years since Boy Child,
Yeah.
some amount of great spaces from Fringe, Patrick's Day, Electric Picnic, with Katie Tempest, Riot, uh, and that. So I mean, how do you feel? I suppose the question I ask a lot of singers: how do you feel when you it's just you there with your microphone, with your own words in front of larger audiences? Is that a very different feeling to a small, say, boutique poetry night to performing in Vicar Street? You know,
Oh goodness. I think a small group of people probably scares me a bit more.
okay,
Yeah, I find the first time I totally bombed on stage. Yeah, I'll share. I'll
right,
tell I'll tell you one time I totally bombed on stage, and this was like after I had like started getting into slams, and I was getting really, really into I became such a slam fiend, right? So I walked into this particular open mic, and I was like, okay, I'm about to set pace in here. They're gonna know Felispeaks at the end of this, la la la. I got there right, and it was like a really cramped space. This is pre-COVID. Oh, bless it.
no,
And everybody was so close. I could see everybody's eyeballs. There was people like breathing up by my shoes. I was like, oh my god. As soon as I started my first line, I was frozen. I found somebody's eyes to look into and I shot myself. I was like, oh my. I just was like, thank you very much, excuse me. And I walked off the stage because literally nothing. This was before I learned how to improvise and on the fly, and that was one of the times I really realized I better know what the hell I'm talking about when I get up on stage. So with bigger crowds, I find that bigger crowds mean there's bigger lights. You don't get to see as much of the crowd. You can just feel their energy, which is all I need. I don't need you looking at me extra hard. So with bigger crowds of people, there's a distance between us because I don't have to get to know you personally all the way, but I can feel your energy and I can speak to you like you can all like I can see you the way you can see me. So with bigger crowds, I feel more comfortable. There's much more space for the both of us. I say both of us as audience and then performer.
yeah,
Um, but I typically enjoy bigger crowds because I just feel more comfortable. But in general, when I get up on stage, I feel vulnerable. I just feel vulnerability, but I also feel very powerful. Which is an interesting thing to say. I guess it's weird thing to say that you feel powerful when you're on stage by yourself. But yeah, there's a certain sense of like, and it's the power is just for me. And that's the only thing I don't share with the audience. I just enjoy feeling powerful by myself. And I suppose that's the only thing that keeps me confident throughout the whole performance. Feels like the most confident and the most powerful part of who I am is who's presenting on stage. And coupled with vulnerability, I think it makes for a great performer.
I mean, I think, yeah, no, but you're right. And I think, as a theatre director, I think for me, that's what you're going after the whole time, is that kind of, that power in vulnerability. If you can nail that, uh,
Mhm.
because that's what people watching empathize with. They see you as, the person under the light, but they also recognize themselves in the way that you're very, you're laying yourself bare, you're vulnerable in relation to the way you're speaking. And also, I mean, I suppose for you as well, there's been, like, even your art form, you've kind of you move between, say, the spoken word place, but also now performing and being at like literary festivals, which is fantastic. Do you know what I mean? I think, and it shows how literary festivals and the literary art form is kind of opened out hugely in the last, let's say, decade. That, like, now the Wexford Literary Festival, Corch, there's all these spaces now have spoken word artists, and that must be very interesting to be up like, not against, but up on the same platforms or in the same festivals as authors and playwrights and people that publish books, and to have that those conversations.
Yeah, it's a really interesting thing, spoken word, and the number of spaces if it seems to be welcomed. Yeah, I found that when I started getting into literary spaces and festivals, I suppose one of the best parts is I didn't know what was supposed to be happening there. So therefore I didn't feel like I wasn't supposed to be there or that this might be a weird mix. It was only upon arriving and then I'm in maybe whatever theater space or event space that I'm supposed to perform at. And I've just seen maybe a show just ending. So I'm walking in, for the last 10 minutes of whatever is supposed to be going on, and I'm seeing like, oh, this is very different to what I'm doing. I'm just thinking there, diverse, wide range of things happening. And then you kind of like, it's only been maybe in the past year and a half that I started reading a bit more about what, literary festivals look like and are like. And I'm like, oh, that's an interesting juxtaposition. But also starting poetry in a hip hop scene gives you that kind of comfort that you can just be anywhere. And as long as you have that midway between power and vulnerability, that you're completely fine where you are.
Okay.
Um, so I've just kind of learned to be comfortable in these new spaces. So literary festivals and spoken word has also brought me to a lot of academic spaces where I'm like, oh, this is interesting. Now I'm in a university all of a sudden, still doing spoken word. So it's you get comfortable being placed in different places because of how versatile spoken word is.
Yeah, yeah. And I mean, on that, then how do you kind of I suppose straddle the context then of being asked to be a spokesperson for things, or no, being asked to talk about certain issues, or being asked to talk about. I mean, is that something you have to kind of, not, I don't mean fight against, but protect your kind of self from in relation to, what I mean? Because obviously you've been vocal about certain things, but then suddenly, and I know this from lots of different artists, suddenly you get asked to be just that. You know what I mean? To be just the person who speaks about that, or just that. And is that something that you struggle with, or is that something that you embrace, or?
Um, I think for me, I do a lot of picking and choosing whether this would be worth my time or this would be worth the space that is asking me to provide it. So one of the big things is mainly with race relations. I suppose at the height of Black Lives Matter in summer, I got a lot of emails about it, a lot of publications or news type outlets, and I was just like, "Yo, whoa, 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 everybody, let's just relax a minute." I'm a poet still. Do you know what I mean? So I suppose I wouldn't rock up there without in a lot of these spaces without them acknowledging that I'm also a poet. Um, and what I mean by that is just so that my identity doesn't get lost in literally the color of my skin and speaking on behalf of race and people that experience racism. So if you want me to talk about a personal experience, they better be a personal poem coming with it, like, or you're wasting my time. You know what I mean? So just basically putting my identity in their face,
Yeah.
more or less, remembering who I am as in all these layers. And if you're going to benefit, I better benefit too. But also in general, just to protect myself from the stress and the feeling used thing. I generally am very pick and choose about the spaces that I choose to be the spokesperson in.
Yeah.
And I also try and make it very clear that I'm speaking from a personal perspective and from just my thought process.
Yeah.
Same way with poetry.
Yeah, I mean it's interesting because we have currently we have Lorraine Marr, who's curated the I Am Irish kind of exhibition, and kind of is very much active in that space as an artist in residence. But we've been working with Lorraine for like the last 4 or 5 years, and have been kind of involved in that context for many years. But it's with big conversations about when that explosion happened over the summer, that it was like, yeah, there was an awful lot of that happening, of kind of people being brought in to kind of speak about stuff and kind of going, well, sorry, we've been here for the last decade. It's not like suddenly, yeah. And I think that's, I mean, in some ways it's understandable because people are trying to, maybe make up time and do good and kind of, but as you say, you exist because of your art form.
Mhm.
Um, and that's where you kind of platform yourself first of all. Um, and notwithstanding that, you have also performed for very high profile people. Say concerns. I just I didn't realize this, Belly, that concerns 50th anniversary and the roll call of people that were in Dublin Castle at that event. I mean, like Mr. Clinton, the President Higgins, UN Deputy Secretary General, kind of guy. That's pretty cool.
It was that day is still such a wild day. I could not believe it. Like I remember when I got the email from Concern from Dominic the Concern, and I was like, okay, this is amazing. What, they must be joking. They asked me to come in for a minute for a meeting. So I'm like, okay, let's see what they have to say. And if I felt like I was in one of those American movies where suddenly there's a round table and you're like the girl in sneakers in the center of it. I rocked up looking the most artist looking. I was so stereotypical artist looking. Oh God, shame. Like I just remember wearing this big woolly jumper and some sneakers, and everybody is walking in with suits and a watch. And it was very serious, having a real chat. And then they were like, oh, what was your fee? And then in my head, I was thinking, I'll say something wild, right? And I said my wild number, and they looked at me like, okay, that's grand. We'll send you the files. And I was like,
No,
damn it.
I should have doubled it.
They don't mind.
Yeah.
But it was so interesting. I remember the day of, I wore my best dress. I went in and I opened, the little booklet you get at the event. I opened the booklet. I was looking at all the names and I was stunned. I was genuinely, I don't think they actually mentioned the caliber of people that were going to be there like that. And I remember looking like I'm the only poet in the room. Heck, I'm the only artist in the room. Like it got bigger and bigger. I was like, oh, this is crazy. All the presidents are here. All of them. The only one missing is Obama. Like, just like, this is crazy. And then I got a hug from one of the UN people. I couldn't even keep names in my head because at some point I just started crying. I was just looking at them like, oh my God. you know, and I think that was a really defining moment for me because it it felt like I was acknowledged in a different way because I wasn't even acknowledged like that. It wasn't like an art space. It wasn't a space that was created to, to kind of feed that kind of thing. It was just more of a, this is something completely outside of art and this is a corporate space and they still think you deserve to be here. And that was really shocking
Yeah.
for me and overwhelming. And then I got to shake President Bill Clinton, and I was like, I have this picture forever. And my mom sent it to everybody on her WhatsApp group messages. So that was interesting.
I mean, it's really fascinating that a lot of the time that artists, when they go into that space, don't realize the power that they have inherently in them, because they are not, their work is not like the work of that
Yeah.
very statutory, structuralized kind of place. And there's a great honesty then that in that can happen in those conversations.
Yeah, definitely. I think it was, I don't think the audience was expecting it either. I think it was a pleasant it was a pleasant surprise for them, because I could feel the energy of the audience, and it was quite, oh wow, this is a different thing, considering um, for the day it was a lot of important conversations and videos and panel discussions, and then I just had to go up there and perform a poem in the middle of it, and everybody was like, oh, we didn't see that coming. And I felt it was a great energy, it was very well received,
Yeah,
and that felt amazing. And
yeah.
I thought that I wasn't as intimidated anymore. I felt like I was contributing something valuable and necessary as the people with, a 20-minute lecture.
Can I ask you about your work then? I mean, like, do you find, you mentioned earlier on that you say your process necessarily hasn't changed hugely over the course of your career thus far, but do you find the things that you're writing about changed, or are changing, or are they kind of ebbing and flowing the whole? What I'm saying is, do you go back to work that you've written before and kind of look at it again, or like how does your work evolve in that way?
Oh, that's interesting. I once attended a workshop that was about rewriting old poems, poems that you've written before, and just being able to go back over them and look at them with new eyes. But generally, I'm not that kind of person. Once I've written a piece, and it's edited to my satisfaction in that moment, I generally don't go back maybe a year later and rewrite it or edit it, because I think the piece has served the purpose of the time that I wrote it for, and so I kind of leave it in the unseen frame that I like it in. But generally, I do write about old topics or things that I used to write about, but then now I find that I have all these new things that I want to say, all these new topics that interest me, and obviously that comes with age and experience and all the things that tickle my fancy. But on top of that, I think I do a lot of writing that's not necessarily about the topics I used to write about, nor the ones that are generally interesting to me, but it's now about different ways of writing for myself. Because before, my general process was about myself, but now I try and find new ways of writing things that are just for me, just things for me to keep for myself. So one of the things that I started doing, for instance, is I've started writing in between the Great Hunger Days. So I'd finish a performance or a day's performance of the Great Hunger, and I'd write basically, 4 lines about what that experience that particular day was like, and what contributed or what was new about it. So now, like, hopefully at the end of it, I'll have like 11 little short poems about my experience with the Great Hunger, and that's just for me. So I think that's the new thing, is finding all these new creative ways to keep writing and keep creative for myself, and it's been fun.
Yeah, yeah. And how it was kind of, obviously a lot of your work has been engagement with, I mean, not so much now in the context of COVID, but in like engaging with communities, engaging with kind of people, and like, and particularly like say something like Our Places, Our Stories over in Treehopton. Like, is that something that you kind of get a lot from, that kind of, interfacing with the general public?
Yeah, absolutely. I really, really enjoy workshops and working with communities that are of interest. But mostly in general, just being able to communicate with people and to actively share art with them, and a writing process, and getting them thinking and starting conversations. And that's just really exciting to me, because one, I like talking and I like engaging with people, but also I like to think that those engagements are impactful and they impact me just as much as I impact them. So that helps me as a creative and as a writer to be able to see things from many different perspectives, and be able to see it from a particular community group, which means that it has more links to like the surrounding areas. So then I find out more about the people as well as the people, the area they're living in. So it's a double whammy.
Yeah, yeah.
Good thing is double whammy a good thing. I don't know if I used that correctly.
You know, you did.
Okay.
Yeah.
So yeah,
And I suppose what's interesting, and obviously there's a huge, tradition of storytelling and story making and poetry in the Irish tradition. Is that shared in the Nigerian tradition, Felicia? Is there a kind of, is storytelling a big part of Nigerian culture as well?
yeah, I think a lot of folklore, a lot of um, adages, a lot of folklore adages, a lot of like warnings are all wrapped up in stories,
Yeah,
and it's how people just pass down old world in, and even animal stories. That's a big one. Like the lion and the tortoise, or the camel and the goat became friends, and this is the lesson to learn. Yeah, so those are really interesting, and there are a lot of Nigerian versions of those as well. I
yeah,
think called fables. Yeah, so yeah, there's a lot of storytelling, and there's a lot of is it proverbs? There's a lot of proverbs that come with a story that is layered in this, that's linked to this family. So one is to scare you straight, but two, it's just because our culture is quite rich like that. So we have enough stories to scare you straight.
yeah. I'm gonna rob that phrase. That's a brilliant phrase. And could be most recently then kind of Patty. What was that experience? I mean, the fantastic book. Uh,
Yeah.
but as a performer to get the opportunity to perform that, was that strange?
Yeah, it was a little strange, but so I learned a lot of new things with Tati, and this is the exciting thing about taking on kind of quirky new projects. It's just that you get to enhance your skill as a performer, and Tati really helped with that. So I was both, not both. I was narrator. I was Tati from age 5 to about age 12. So I had to develop voices for different ages. I was also her mother, her father, her sister's voice, and then her English best friend's voice at some point. So I was doing a lot of like changing voices, a lot of voice change, a lot of physical things as well, and then owning the space as well as reading, but not trying not to like read. So more or less trying to learn it off ish.
Yeah,
It was a very, very interesting process, and I thoroughly enjoyed it. Like it was, and it felt hard. That's how I know that I did something, that I flexed a new muscle. You know
yeah,
what I mean? Doing something over and over again till you're tired, like learning how to do a posh English accent for a 9-year-old. I was like, this is crazy. I was so bad at the English accent. I kept sounding like a Californian little girl. So the director had to like get her cousin to send me a voice note of the lines in her posh English accent voice. Then I had to go home and memorize it and be able to pull it up out of the script anytime.
yeah.
It was crazy.
Um, it's interesting because both Patty, I suppose, and Great Hunger, it's not your own work. I mean, it's kind of you as a pure actress, not pure, but not like as not being a performer of your own poetry, and
Yeah,
that's a very different muscle.
very different muscle. One of the interesting things Katrina said to me on the first day, Katrina's the director in the Abbey Theatre, The Great Hunger. One of the first things she said to me in my first rehearsal, she said, see your poetry flow, we're going to break that. And I was like, the only thing I have? Like, I cultivated this. You want to break it? It was so trippy because basically the Patrick Kavanagh, The Great Hunger, is a poem. They're just really long stanzas. So she wanted me, a poet, to say a poem without a poetry voice or without a poetry flow. And I was like, this is not how it's done. um, but it was such an interesting experience. It was perfect. I was like, yeah, I probably would have been stuck in that poetry flow if somebody didn't break it. And it was really fascinating learning how to, because I used to say all the time, especially when I started in theater with Boy Child, I used to say, I am not an actress. I do not act. I like that is a whole different animal. It's a whole different beast on itself that deserves a lot of like skill and learning. And I feel like from Tati to the Great Hunger, I feel like they're breaking me down into actress form.
As long as you can pick your poetry flow back up at the door on the way out, it's kind of if
Yeah.
you go to writing and kind of go, oh, where's that gone? Can I have that back, please? Uh,
Yes.
and do you like in that? I mean, like looking to the future for yourself, like is there when you write now, when you kind of write, and I suppose I'm asking this for anyone who finds this on the depths of YouTube in years to come. This is we're speaking at kind of the end of 2020 in the middle of the COVID pandemic, and obviously performing is very difficult at the moment.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, the Great Hunger brilliantly has managed to stay on within guidelines, but like performing in clubs or performing on stages indoors is impossible right now. So you, in relation to your own writing, have you found that very difficult space to inhabit, Felicia?
Yeah, being able to perform my own pieces has been hard. Currently, I think the only place I've done that is online. Yeah, it's just a lot of, and it's different. Performing online is very different. Setting up your camera in your house, it doesn't have the same energy. You don't have the same flow or the same movement. So even if the piece is great, like you're stuck in the back of your head, like, is the delivery really that good? Because it's not the usual space, and I'm in a box really.
Yeah,
So it's been kind of like accepting the reality of what my art can look like without the same energy as the stage.
yeah.
And that's been quite difficult actually. So I jumped at the chance at Tati, like that was so reviving. So yeah, I do miss it. I miss the regularity of it. Hopefully it comes back
You
to.
know, and it must have been something. Was it a great like speaking about kind of concern and like a war, the fringe and all, but like was it back in 2017 when you got the African Professional Network of Ireland Award for that? That must have been
Yeah,
amazing to get as
that
well.
was, and that happened like maybe um right after my birthday. So it was the midnight of my birthday. It just gone past midnight. I felt like Cinderella. It was just the midnight of my birthday. I was here in a fancy dress trying to have like a great award night as well as a great birthday afterwards. And so I wasn't really expecting to win, but I was like, at least I look cute. And then they said my name and I was like, what? And I was wearing these really dumb shoes. So I had to hobble over rather unelegantly in this really cute dress to collect my award. But it was a stunning moment because I felt like, why are you looking at me? How is this even a thing? How have I managed to convince you that I'm worth an award? And this is not even in a self-depreciating way. Just I was just really curious, like, how did this happen? And it felt amazing. Yeah, it felt really amazing.
Right, I won't keep you much longer. I'm just interested in that space that you still like. Is that flow between spoken word poetry and hip hop still so that space still interesting to you? I mean, you mentioned that kind of. I suppose what I really love about your work is it has that kind of flow to it, but it also has that kind of edge to it. There's a kind of a what's the word, like a robustness. I mean, there's kind of that in the same way that kind of MCing does. It has
Mhm.
that. I mean, obviously, certain of your poems come from and about a certain context, and some of them might be, more front ended than not. But in a general, your kind of verse does have that performative nature in it by at its core, and is that very important to you?
Yeah, definitely because I write more to perform than for you to read it. So whenever I'm writing it with body movements in mind as I'm writing. And I suppose, yeah, it needs the performative element for me anyway. And that's just kind of like my technique of writing.
Okay. Felicia, thanks so much for taking part in this. It's been an absolute pleasure to chat to you. And good luck with the rest of the run of The Great Hunger. And I hope the weather stays slightly better than it was last night.
Yeah.
And that you get to stand and sit under your tree for a long time.
Yes. Thank you so much, Nigel. It was
Talk to you
lovely.
soon.
All right. Speak to you soon.